Hi, everyone. I'm Letitia Rodriguez, and today I'm going to be interviewing my niece. I want to thank you so much for allowing me to interview you today. I know this is kind of intrusive, but.
Of course.
So let's start with question number one. Can you share a little bit about you, your family dynamics, and about Elijah?
So I'm a mom, and I have an 8-year-old daughter. I also have a 5-year-old son, and I'm married. We got pregnant with our second when my daughter was 3 years old, and that was a completely different experience as far as childbirth goes. And we are a very busy family, managing having a girl, having a boy, being married, working full time, owning a home, and we're sort of new to being extra needs parents.
Tell me a little bit about that.
My son was born with a heart defect. He was born full term, but he was born with a heart defect, and he also had trouble breathing. So he was in the NICU for 5 weeks, and that was a really scary experience just because we had no idea that was even coming.
Yeah.
And what we thought was going to be such a joyous moment at the hospital ended up being, we were afraid of something happening, and every day in the NICU was something up and down, and then it turned out to be that they didn't really have answers for us in the end. So we were airlifted to Children's, and that's been a journey ever since then, from developmental delays to not hitting milestones. In the beginning, it was really hard because he was having a lot of trouble breathing. So, when you're new parents, you're worried about SIDS, you're worried about your child, suffocating. For us, we were worried about that all the time.
Yeah. So, having learned about the disabilities, what services has he received, and how are you doing with those services?
So at the age of about, I want to say he was about 6 months old, and to be honest with you, it's still sort of like a blur to me because it was just so crazy. But we followed up with the occupational therapist at the NICU. So whenever a child is in the NICU for a while, they have a follow-up prevention program. Mm-hmm. And she immediately recommended us to Tri-County Regional Center from the beginning. Okay. And that was an interesting experience because I was sort of in denial, just being a parent to another child. That all children are different. That every child develops at their own milestones, at their own pace, their own time. But she immediately told me that my son was at high risk for delays. And I remember going home crying, wondering if I should even go through with it. And after speaking to my mom and my husband about it, we decided, in the end, it's really doing what's best for your child. Mm-hmm. So since then, that was the beginning of our therapy journey. And at that time, he had just turned 1 year old, and he started getting occupational therapy. He started getting early intervention. And he was still too young for speech, but they were recommending that he would get that as he gotten older. And then we turned to behavioral therapy. We've also done physical therapy. We've done a range of therapies, from people coming to our house, and it was a crazy time.
What has, now that Elijah's 5
years old,
how has the therapy worked? What have you learned about the therapy that works for him?
Well, I've learned a lot from therapists coming to my house, from trying to have more patience to, slowing him down, because my child is nonverbal, and it's really hard for him to articulate. And in the beginning, it was even harder for him to control his emotions because the fact that he couldn't speak, and that alone has been hard. Just, when the therapist would come over, I would tell them, in the end, after a while of us getting frustrated, I felt like we were able to get our point across. So my biggest takeaway from therapy is that whatever I think doesn't make me a bad parent. I can only do what's best at that moment, because I think that all of us parents have mom guilt or doubt ourselves in some way, but it's really a ride and a journey, not just for him, but for me too. And I've learned a lot of coping mechanisms to how to deal with him in public, how to deal with him at home, how to punish him in a way that's not so invasive, but also where he understands.
Mm-hmm. And for the record, she's an amazing mom. Patience of a saint.
Thank you.
Seriously.
Thank
And
you.
I love you for that. Let's talk about nonverbal. What have you learned in the last couple years with Elijah's therapies? How do you communicate now with him, and how does he communicate with others?
I personally feel like my son is super receptive. It's expressive that he struggles with the most. He still does score a little low in all of the evaluations that we've done and express in receptive, but what I've learned is that I sometimes need to use little signs with him. We tried doing sign language in the beginning, but as he's gotten older, it's turned more into signs with words, and he communicates with one word only, sometimes two. And the biggest milestone right now is he's saying 3 words at a time, but he doesn't really use the I, the me, or he doesn't use the end of the sentence, but he's getting there. So the biggest thing I've learned too is that I have to slow him down because his attention span is very short, and it can be really hard sometimes.
Yeah. And with others, how do you communicate to them that they just need to be patient, or what is it that you communicate to others about
I'm
him?
still struggling with that, to be honest with you.
Okay.
That's where I'm at right now, is when we go out in public, I feel like everybody's staring. I feel like sometimes people do look around and they notice, oh, your son's extra loud, or, oh, how old is your son? And when I say 5 years old, I think a lot of them kind of get caught off guard because it's hard not to compare your child to other children. It's really hard to do that, but especially given, cousins and growing up, that being a first-time parent, your child needs to be doing this at 6 months and this at a year, and you come to the point when you do have a child who does have extra needs, you realize that just because they're not hitting those milestones doesn't mean that they'll never hit them at all.
It's true.
So I feel like I'm learning that I don't have to pay attention to what other people think out in public. So I don't really want to explain myself either, because I feel like that's one thing I've learned is I don't owe anybody an explanation, but I'm learning to deal with that.
Okay.
It's hard.
Yes. So he's 5 and getting ready to go to kindergarten. We're very excited about that.
Yeah.
So how are you preparing yourself, and how did you prepare for the school, and talk about that little journey there?
So kindergarten transition is something that I was really worried about, just because he's not ready for kindergarten. When you think about general ed and you think about having another, just having my daughter. But I've learned that there's special needs programs and there's amazing programs, but it really comes down to the communication that you have with his teachers. And I'm lucky that he went to a preschool that is for children who have extra needs. So his preschool offered motor room skills for children who have motor delays. His school offered speech delay skills. His school offered an educational room. So he has a team along with the team that he had at Tri-County Regional. So I'm very fortunate because he started early. And something that I've learned is that a lot of parents don't start their therapy journey till their child gets to be the age of 4, 3. So I'm fortunate that we were able to start early on. So I have educated myself on individualized personal plans, individualized educational plans. So all of that comes to play with the transition to kindergarten. And I did a little research on, the programs, because it's scary going into the school district in kindergarten, because you don't want to not push your child to their potential. So you don't want them to be in a severe special needs class, yet you do know that your child does belong in a special needs class. So he ended up being in the mild to moderate. And we're just gonna go with the flow.
Did you meet with the school prior to enrollment, or how did you know?
So we had an IEP meeting, and that is individualized educational plan. So I was lucky enough to have his caseworker through the regional center attend. His speech therapist is on board. His pediatrician is amazing and wants to know everything. Then his team at the school, and then you meet with the school district representative. And because of my son's history, he also has the psychologist come, the occupational therapist come, the speech therapist come, the physical therapist come. So, it's kind of intimidating as a parent because you're in there, and really what they do is they talk about it's like a SWOT analysis where they talk about his strengths, his weaknesses, his threats, and what his potential is and what they believe that he should qualify for. So it's kind of tricky because as a parent, if you don't go into these meetings on the same page as them, or at least knowing what you want for your child, you won't have a voice.
That's a good point. You and I actually had a conversation about advocacy for your child, and making sure that you're, like you said, in tune and in line with what they're saying, but yet also getting your wishes across. How did you that's an intimidating space. So how did you get that across?
Well, I was really nervous, and to be honest with you, it was causing me a lot of stress in the beginning before we even had the meeting. But what really helped me was sitting down and writing it out and talking about it with my husband, and really thinking about what was best for him. Because when you think about school districts and special needs programs, and you also, after doing research, you learn that a lot of that has to do with the budget and what the school district can afford. And so if you're not in there, they're going to give your child the minimum.
I see.
And I want my child to have the maximum.
Sure.
Because my child needs one-on-one attention, and he also needs group therapy as well. And I was really adamant about the fact that I want him to have the chance to go into general ed. It may not be for him right now, but I'm hoping that it'll be there for him later. So I ask them to meet with the teacher, because they don't, in the special needs program, you don't really have a choice as far as schools go. It's not like you go to your home district school. If your home district school doesn't offer that program, you have to go to the next school. So I was really adamant about meeting the teacher before I signed the IEP, because I wanted to make sure that I connected with her and that she kind of got me. And I felt like
understood
that
your
school was
wants.
a good place for my son. So that gave me a lot of ease. That's what prepared me. And after I did that, that's when I signed my IEP.
Good job.
Thank you.
So what advice would you give other parents in your predicament, in your situation?
I would recommend that you put your guard down, because I know in the beginning I was in denial. And I guess I can say don't put your guard down, but be open. Be open to other people's opinions. In the beginning, it sort of feels like all they're telling you is everything your child can't do. And you start to learn that it's about focusing on the little things that they learn to do. So I recommend that you educate yourself on advocacy, on the different programs that your local community has. A lot of times your local community offers free services for your child, and there's so many services that you can get whether or not they're in the Tri-County Regional Center or not. And I also recommend meeting with other parents who have children with disabilities, because it's kind of new to be on this journey, and we all feel the same way. We all have the same thoughts, and it's a journey that you just take one day at a time.
Yeah, I think that's really valuable. It also gives you a place to feel safe where you can talk to other parents who are experiencing the same thing that you are. So thank you for that.
You're
I so
welcome.
appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you all, and I hope you enjoyed our interview.